Welcome to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast, a unique approach to exploring the intersections of religion, trauma, sacred spaces, and mental health.
Each month, we choose a different topic to discuss weekly from different perspectives. The first week, we explore the faith, community, and clergy perspective. The second week, the mental health practitioner perspective. The third week, the perspective of individuals working to heal from religious trauma. And the fourth week, we invite a special guest who has been impacted by our monthly topic to join us.
This format follows the design of the Faith and Trauma Center's 3 pathways for resources and education. We invite you to explore all the additional material that we offer at faithandtraumacenter.org.
Let's jump into this week's conversation.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Faith and Trauma Center podcast. I am one of your hosts. I am Christy Love, and I am joined by my good friend, my co-host, the co-founder of the Faith and Trauma Center, formerly known as the Flip Table Collective, Holly Madden. Hi, Holly. How are you tonight?
I'm tired. I'm feeling this transition into winter and this need for like more rest and more slowness, which is not happening in our fast-paced world. So I'm feeling the weight of the tiredness. What about you?
I also feel like you kind of get a little bit of the short end because we're in 2 different time zones. And so I feel like every week when I say, hey, how are you? Your answer is almost always that you're tired, but it's 2 hours later where you are than where I am. And so sometimes I feel a little guilty about that. So I just have to name that.
Yes, and my day does start very early, but I literally spend my entire morning, like Monday, excited about our conversation. So while I'm physically tired, I've been in this like heart space all day of just like ready to chat, and like I enjoy getting to like dive into deep things and I get giddy over silly naturey things. So physically,
I mean, that's fair. I think this podcast and even our previous podcast that you and I did together, I think has always kind of been, you know, a good safe space, a processing space, a place to come and think through things deeply and do so in a way that invites others to think through things with us as well. And I think that's a space that we both really thrive on and need.
I have a fun question, like a fun question. I was thinking about this today,
let's hear it.
It's very simple, but I thought it would be a fun, like, get to know you a little bit. So I was thinking about how we always have like a cup with us almost every single time we podcast. And I know how much we enjoy drinking caffeinated or herbal things.
I'm glad you finished that sentence because I was like
the slowness. So I thought it would be fun to talk about like what is our little cute I have a mushroom. For those who are like listening, I have this cute little orange mushroom mug that I'm drinking out of today. And I feel like you and I are always late to podcasts because we're always like, oh, I'm like making my tea or I'm brewing my coffee. So I thought it'd be fun to say like, hey, what's in your little mug today?
I was going to say, I feel like your mugs are normally some variation of woodland creatures,
Yes,
trees, and or plant life.
yes. I love my collection of mugs, and they're quirky, and they have like, there's like, I have a mug that's like one of my sacred tea mugs that you got for me. I think it was when you went to Seattle the first time or so. It was like, it's really special to me. Like I always drink out of it because I know you brought it back for me. And I have like a mug that has like a little squirrel that sits on it. And I love to bring that to Zoom meetings because like the little squirrel sitting on top of the mug, and it just feels like this really special conversation starter and also like breaks the tension. So much so that I love my mugs that like there is very few things in my house that if my kids like break, that my heart's just like, eh. And if like my kids break a mug, like there is grief.
That's fair.
Not anger, things break, accidents happen. Like I try to be very slow, like to respond that way, but I would definitely cry over my mushroom mug or my squirrel mug or my bird mug or my butterfly mug or
and the list goes on and on. Okay, well, I don't have a woodland creature mug. I don't even think I have one in my collection, and I definitely don't have one today.
You have a lot of You have some really cool social justice mugs. You have some funny like Jesus deconstruction mugs. You have
I
like
do. So I have to be really, really super straight with you right now. You asked this question, and I immediately went, oh crap, which mug am I using? Because I do have a couple that probably would not be appropriate to read out loud. My husband really likes when I get on like my religious trauma rants and I'll say something and I'm like, somebody should make a coffee mug with that on it. And then like 2 weeks later, a coffee mug appears at my house with this random saying that I said in a fit of rage, usually at the patriarchy or at something. So I have a few of those that are not necessarily the greatest thing to be quoting publicly. But this one is perfectly acceptable. So I've got an MLK Jr. quote on my mug today that says, "The time is always right to do what is right."
I love
So,
that.
yeah.
And what is in your mug today?
This is cold coffee.
Oh, that's so sad.
Um,
I thought you were
yeah.
making.
Well, I was making coffee, Holly. I poured 3/4 of this cup from the coffee that was sitting in my coffee pot from this morning with
No.
creamer. And then I made just 2 cups to add to it, but I don't think it was quite enough to actually warm it up.
Do you
Um,
like pause so you can have something to
no,
like?
it's fine. I mean, I'm enough of a caffeine junkie that I will drink my coffee any temperature, which grosses a lot of people out. But yeah, it's like less than lukewarm, half new, half day, end of day
Yes.
coffee with some creamer. So, nothing really super appetizing.
Yes. Well, while you drink coffee throughout the day, you've done better. When I knew you, there were like, or when I first met you, it was like
I measured
somehow
it by pots instead of
it,
cups. Yeah.
it was kind of scary. Um, and then you typically end your nights with like hot chocolate, which is like one of my, every time you send me like a Snapchat of like your hot chocolate. And I love the little like ritual of beverages. I start my day with coffee. I've become such a routine person, Christy. This is ridiculous. Like
I
every
know I
morning,
really don't know how to handle it, but
I have
I'm
my
trying to adjust.
coffee with my little vanilla oat milk creamer, and it's hot and it's delicious and it wakes me up. And then when I get off of work, and I come home and I need to like second win because then it's like, okay, now like parenting and cooking dinner and homeworking and all the things. I make iced coffee, and my parents turned me onto the most delicious soy milk creamer. So I use that with my iced coffee. And then by this time of night, I'm drinking my herbal tea. And so I almost always have herbal tea in my mugs during podcasting. And it's like a ritual and it's like sacred. And I just like hope that there are people that are listening. I know you might be listening at all hours of the day who like feel the need when you sit down with our podcast to drink tea or coffee or hot
I was going to
chocolate.
say, our old podcast that Holly and I did with some friends, the intro used to say, pour yourself a cup of hot coffee or tea, and, kick up your feet and have this conversation with us. So
Yes. Yes.
hopefully you get to do that.
Yes. And you get to know us a little bit better in our quirkiness.
Exactly. Exactly. So,
We can dive in.
well, we are going to dive into a conversation today. Really, Holly, this one was kind of a conversation that was on your heart, wanting to have. And I think it's kind of come from several different conversations and things lately. So I'm actually going to let you kind of introduce and frame kind of where your heart is, where your thoughts are, and what you want to talk about.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do this without my ADHD like running amok because I feel like my brain is like I could take this so many different directions. So we're just gonna kind of see what happens. But yeah, when I thought that I forgot the topic, so I texted you and asked, "What are we talking about?" And then your response made me feel better that we hadn't actually like solidified a topic or there wasn't like an idea on the table, which then also made me feel silly that I didn't remember that, but we're fine now. But yeah, when you just asked like what was on my heart, like the first thing that I typed to you actually kind of surprised me. But it's beautiful. But I've just been in a place like I think I've been really honest, and this podcast has been like a really beautiful place for the processing of that. of just some really serious deconstruction. And for me, it's been a season of having not only grown up in the church and being surrounded by so much evangelical faith, and then getting to be part of this beautiful transition together with you, with both of our partners, of like being at a trying to be not quite as conservative Southern Baptist church. And then the transition from that place and your calling to be pastor, following you through some like internships and being at a church where we were loving on the kiddo that we got to foster for a season and his family and support them. So we were there for a while. And then getting to start our own very liberal and outreach focused church and loving and just being so grateful for that season of my life and getting to do that with you. And my faith grew so much in that season to now being in a season where we're now on a year, half, 2 years, almost 2 years, where we've not, my husband and I haven't been in physical church. We do like engage with services with the church that you're at, Christy. I know Scott sometimes like jumps on and will like see what other people are talking about just for kind of like this awareness. But we've not engaged in that space and we've not worked in that space, which is the first time in both of our lives that we've not had that extreme proximity. And so the deconstruction in this space has been insane because I think that there's just been like this really beautiful nothingness for me. Sorry, this is long-winded. I promise I'm going to get there. I just feel like this was really important to talk about. Like, and that's why I think it can be so beautiful. And for those listening, maybe there is some people that relate to that or need that permission to like, sometimes stepping away is where you like find out who you are, or you find out like what you genuinely believe at your core. It allows you to reconstruct and to reconstruct privately, to reconstruct with like the holiness of just like who and what is important to you. Because no matter what you're a part of, there's still something so performative about church. And I think that like I admire and love what you're doing, Christy, because I see this like radical way to do it differently. But we still live in the world of social media where things are, you know, there's these images and there is tension and there's people that are gonna like come at you or challenge you. And to not be in that, it just kind of leaves this weird space of like, this is just for me now, you know? And I've been really grateful for this season for that. So much so that there was like this piece of me that was like, do I even still believe in anything anymore? Like, I don't pray anymore. Like, walking away from a lot of that. I mean, and emotional because I feel like it's kind of like needing to name that. I haven't named that really publicly yet. And I think in the last several months, there's been this gentle comeback in this really beautiful way, and a reconnection to things, but it's different now, you know, and it means something more to me now. It's rooted in something so much richer, and it has roots in everything. It has roots in my upbringing. It has roots in the ministry that we did together. It has roots in the work that we do with faith and trauma. It has roots in the beautiful yoga culture and the writings that I've spent a lot of time understanding and experiencing. It has roots in a lot of the Indigenous Native American stories that I've learned a lot about, trying to dive down into my own ancestry and like being really interested about Irish folklore and tradition and spirituality and Scandinavian and Swedish, like all of those different pieces. And like all of this has come together. And then there's like me and as a mom in this world and like putting it all together in this really beautiful thing. And so, yeah, I think when you said what's on your heart, the thing that came to my mind was like prayer and like coming back to a place of praying personally. Especially in times like these where there is just so much division. And so that was kind of what was on my heart, kind of the intersection of hope, because that's kind of mirrored with, and then I'm going to introduce this. Then Christy, I would really love. I know I already kind of prefaced that I wanted to talk about this because I loved it so much. But yesterday at your church, Christy, you had you're leading a really beautiful, holy, very social justice driven Advent season. And I've always loved church at Christmas time because I think there's just something different about it. And I've always personally, even in like a lot of dark seasons for me, Christmas felt like a time I could connect. Like Easter, no, but Christmas did. And we can just deconstruct that part later. But I have just always kind of clung to, I think, the hope and the love and those messages of like a small newborn baby born to parents that were in the middle of like traveling, and the story of migrant and immigration and injustice and all of that just has always still stuck with me. And so you preached this powerful message yesterday, actually on peace and the lack of peace in the days of the Bible, the story of Jesus's birth. And you talked a lot about the humanity of Mary and Joseph and how human and normal they were. Like you made a comment about like if you were to look in the crowd, you would find them everywhere because they were everyone. Like there wasn't something so unique and special about them, which is what I think we always kind of tend to like almost elevate them, that they were holier or more sacred or more, they were better at praying or something. Like, and that's not true. And so that just really has resonated with me. And I was thinking that because I was thinking of how there had to be moments of like emotion and prayer and things woven into those stories that we don't read about, and because they were sacred and private and emotional and all of those different pieces. So yeah, I would love if maybe you wanted to share a little bit more about that and maybe how my ramble maybe hits you. So
Yeah. I mean, I approached yesterday's message, which is the second in this Advent series called Welcome the Stranger that we're doing at my church. And we've also posted it on the Faith and Trauma Center resource site because I think it's something that a lot of churches could use the resources and adapt. But I was really honest yesterday with our congregation that the second week of Advent, the theme of peace has always been a really difficult theme for me. I struggle with peace being an Advent theme, if I'm honest, pastorally. And so much of why I struggle with that is because I think many people like you, Holly, you're not alone in that, right? Like there's this craving in the midst of chaos and craziness. Advent, I think, really kind of represents this longing of our souls for rest and for comfort, for familiarity, for the ability to slow down and to focus on something that's bigger than us, whether we connect with the holy story of that or not. And I think that inadvertently, in doing that and in craving that, we as people and we as a culture, especially in the Western expressions of Christianity, I think we really kind of take this craving that we have for peace and we project it into the narrative of the nativity, right? And so we start to see this story as this very, like I described it yesterday, this very Thomas Kincaid, beautiful glowing painting and, Silent Night carols and just all the beautiful things that feel warm and fuzzy. And we do that sometimes so much so that we sanitize that story down to where it feels like the story itself is peaceful and beautiful. But in reality, the context of the nativity story as told in the Christian scriptures and the Gospels of Luke and Matthew it was anything but peaceful, right? It was full of chaos. It was completely a political story. And we talked about that yesterday too, and how if that makes you uncomfortable, that we name that this was shaped by politics and a response of politics, and politics played a huge role in that first Christmas story, then most likely you're probably one of those people who has kind of fallen victim to this like hallmarkization, to create a word there, of
Yeah.
Christmas and of that season.
Yeah.
And so, in trying to recontextualize this theme of peace, looking at like the reality is, right? You've got a young teenager who's
Mhm.
married to an older man who has conceived a child. That's a whole other podcast. Um, who, this political mandate comes
Very,
down. They're
very, very
forced, yes, very, very pregnant. They're forced to leave their home. They become forced political migrants.
Mhm.
And just like thinking about that trip and that travel and how painful it must have been. And like we talked a lot about the narrative that probably went on in Mary's mind and Joseph's mind. And I shared there's this really phenomenal book called The Gospel According to Jesus Christ. It was written many years ago. It actually won a Pulitzer Prize. It's a work of fiction. So if you approach this book thinking you're going to find some, great theological work, that's not what's going to happen. But it's a work of fiction written by Jose Saramago. And I love books that like fictionalize the life of Jesus to a point that it like humanizes Jesus or
Mhm.
other characters around Jesus. So I have this collection of different books, right? Like Anne Rice has written some books. There's another really funny book about Jesus's best friend writing a gospel, who's a time traveler. That one was interesting, but still. Anyway, but in this book by Jose Saramago, he writes the line, so I can't take credit for it. And he is describing this throng of people traveling on this road, as if it was happening and we were watching this happen. And he said, if you were looking for Mary and Joseph on this road, you wouldn't recognize them. And essentially, like you said, right? He's saying that Mary and Joseph, there was nothing extraordinary about them. Like they really just represented the totality of the human experience. I mean, new parents, right? Trying to figure out how to do it and trying to figure out how to wrestle through poverty and how to make the best of unjust circumstances and how to navigate having to leave their homeland and what's that going to look like. And so, in the midst of all of that, how do we find peace?
Mhm.
How do we find peace and what does that look like? And so, some of what we talked about yesterday was, you know, we are called to create peace and to be people who work for peace in our world. But I also think, as you've named, Holly, and so to connect those dots in that thread, as you tasked me to do, I think that there is inherently a longing in many of us that when we struggle with anxiety, when we struggle with depression, when we have big emotions that we don't always know how to regulate, that there is this craving for a sense of peace and grounding. That's usually the language we use in the mental health world, right? Like to regulate and to ground. But
Mhm.
in the spiritual world, we may not call it that, right? We may call that finding peace or finding center or, whatever that language of whatever tradition you are a part of. And for many people who have been raised with sacred practices, one of the main ways that they are often taught to try to regulate and to ground and to center themselves and to feel peace is through prayer. And that can be really problematic for a lot of people, right? There is a term that you and I use a lot, and it's kind of a newer term that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but the term is prayer trauma. And I believe very strongly that prayer trauma is a very real and very specific kind of religious trauma. It's like a subset of religious trauma. It's a very specific wound that happens. We're going to be doing a webinar in January, on January 16th, talking about prayer trauma, what that is, how to recognize it, healing steps towards it, those kind of things. So, like, I acknowledge that for many people, there's a lot of barriers there where it may not just be an issue of deconstruction, but it may be that there's been a legitimate way that prayer has been weaponized or used to wound. But I do think you're right, that relationship with prayer is one of the many things that often does come through that process of deconstruction, and it has to change over time for people. And what that means, what it represents, shifts.
Yeah. And I think that one of the biggest disservices we do in adulthood is tell children how they're supposed to do something like pray.
Right.
And I think there's these things that we teach kids because they matter. Like before you cross the street, I'm currently working in a preschool. Like before you cross the street, you stop and look both ways. Like you teach children those things for safety, for survival, for awareness. But there's these other pieces that we've taken a lot of authority over, and it's taken away the experience of what something could become to a person.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
and I know that's going to be a lot of what you talk about, but I think that there's something really beautiful. So I think that because I know that this podcast might feel really triggering to someone. And I think when we're saying the word prayer, a lot of what I'm referring to, and I know you're referring to, is very much this piece of like something that is very personal to you. Like there's not like a specific thing that we're doing. Like I think one of my favorite funny stories around prayer is there was like a 2-year period where whenever we would go to my in-laws' house, who they have a ritual of praying around the table before meals, something that my kids still like find really humorous because that's the only place that they have that like hold hands, bow heads, and pray experience. And we tried to be very open with prayer in my house of like, well, what does this mean to you? And let me share a little bit again. I bring this back to it so much because I believe so much in this style of parenting and faith is like, we try to be like, here's what I do. What do you do? That's cool. I love what you do. And just kind of giving them some freedom to explore. And Hudson would close his little eyes and hold our little hands. And every single time, no matter where we were, where you go, I love Christy. And that was it. And for him, that was his prayer. And it was beautiful. He has like shifted now to where he'll say something like, I love my family and I love the earth, or something really sweet. It's small, it's simple, and it's really beautiful. And honestly, I've learned a lot of prayer from him and from my daughter because I think that they see it differently. But yeah, I think that's really important. Like this is kind of this like prayer to me is like this like weird this moment of like pausing to connect, whatever that means from that point forward. But you had kind of mentioned, and I think this is kind of the place we want to take this conversation today, is this like we're going into the holiday season. We're in the middle of Advent right now. Like Christmas will be here before we know it. There is a lot of people who are going into the holidays knowing they're going to face a lot of triggers. Maybe there's some family tension, there's some maybe family estrangement, maybe there's a lot of grief because the economy is terrifying right now, and like Christmas looks a lot different because I know for my family, like we're missing being close to people we want to be close to. We would love to get to see you guys and get to meet my new baby niece in Seattle, and those are off the table this year because of finances. So there's a lot of grief. I know that there's people that are afraid of how they're going to even get presents for their kids or how they're going to keep food on the table. And so there's so many different experiences around the holidays. And while we're in a time when mental health crisis just keeps getting worse, we talk about how overexposure to things and the tension and the pressure in kids and teenagers has made anxiety levels just rise. So it's just a very common experience now for kids as they're experiencing a lot of anxiety about the world. And there's even eco anxiety, which is the fear of the what the world's going to become, like climate change and stuff kids are facing. There's a lot of depression that is both diagnosed and undiagnosed, a lot of those symptoms, and a lot of other disorders that are symptoms that are manifesting. Whether someone chooses to pursue a diagnosis is really their choice for some empowerment and advocacy for themselves and support. But those
Mhm.
symptoms are so present right now. And so like you were talking about a really powerful connection between like prayer or meditation and mental health. So I feel like there's like this piece of this too, like how does something that's spiritual, how can that be something so helpful to us
Yeah.
on a physical way level?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of research, going back multiple decades, right? That have looked at the consistency of prayer proving scientifically to have benefits to people who practice it. Um, we see documentation of lower blood pressure, reduced rates of depression, reduced rates of anxiety, a lot of those kind of pieces. And so that's important for us to acknowledge and to name because that is definitely something outside of the spiritual realm, right? That the medical, the mental health community is definitely recognized as a clear benefit. I would say that for those of you that are listening to this and processing this with us, and maybe like Holly and myself, you've deconstructed what prayer is, what prayer means to you. Maybe you've experienced prayer trauma, and that's something we need to dig into more. And I really encourage you to connect with that webinar on the 16th of January. Reframing prayer, I think, is an important step, right? Um, So recently I heard this study, this story, and it was talking about what happens to people when they are placed into a completely dark, silent room.
Mm.
And they had looked at a lot of different test subjects, and some of the strongest people, right? Mentally strong, physically strong, people that would be, part of this experiment, and they would go into a room, complete silence. And we're talking like numerous days, no silence, not like air conditioners, not like this is like these are rooms that are designed for like the most unbelievable kind of silence that humans can experience. Complete darkness, complete silence. That it was a very small amount of time, typically, usually within hours, that people were just like, done, right? Let me out. I can't do this. I'm done. The people who have managed to do well in that experience all shared one thing in common. And the thing that they shared in common was that they regularly narrated for themselves what they were thinking, feeling, and experiencing out loud. And so, for example, they would say things like, I'm in a dark room. I'm okay. I'm safe. It's very quiet here. I'm very uncomfortable. And they would just kind of, not a constant stream of, verbal regulation, but it was there. And it was kind of this way to say, like, I'm okay. I'm here. And it was this grounding behavior. And I read that study, and actually, it made me think a lot about what we're talking about here, Holly. The technique that they used in that kind of like mindfulness and verbal mindfulness, right? Has now something that's like part of standardized training for like the Navy SEALs, that if they find themselves in situations like to constantly be like narrating to themselves to keep themselves grounded and aware of reality and all of these things. And I share that to say that for those of us who I think have been taught to see prayer as like this checklist, right? Like I have to say these certain words, I have to do these certain things. I really would challenge us to think of it much more like that practice of being in a dark room and being in a space that's silent, being in a place that's really uncomfortable, right? And having this practice of mindfulness and saying, man, I'm really struggling right now. This is really hard. I'm really uncomfortable. Whatever that kind of looks like, whether it's out loud or it's inner dialogue with ourselves, that role of mindfulness, really to me, prayer is really just like a relational form of mindfulness. And it says, I can name those things and I can say those things, and there's nothing that I can't acknowledge in myself in the presence of holiness that is going to end in some kind of rejection for me, right? Like it just kind of gives me this sense of like, um, man, I am just feeling particularly uncomfortable in this situation. And why am I feeling, uncomfortable? What is it that's triggering me right now? And I can kind of think through these things. And I have come to see that as much of prayer as 20 years ago, Christy, who kept a prayer journal that was color coded with highlighters because that's what I was taught to do as a good Christian with my checklist, who would sit up every morning and drink my coffee and pray for an hour. And that kind of constant practice throughout my day that, like, no matter how bad the world gets, no matter how hard the headlines are, no matter how difficult the circumstances are, I can check in with myself and knowing, because in my belief system, right, I don't believe myself to ever be alone. And so like as I check in with myself, I'm also checking in with something that is much larger than me. And so like that study I think really resonated with me. And again, I keep going back to that term relational mindfulness. And I like that so much more than, because I think the word prayer does have some connotation to it. But this like sacred mindfulness, this sacred relational mindfulness of just being able to say, like, I have this ability to relationally connect or name things throughout my day. And it matters to me. It's important for me to acknowledge it to myself, but it's also really important that I recognize that that's a way of connecting with something bigger than myself.
That's really good. I think about a lot of what you're saying in the terms of like the psychology world and like the therapy setting. There is a word that's used that I think really explains like what happens to our mind in prayer, and it's the word reframe. And when you think about it, like especially like when you're praying for someone else, or you're thinking about someone else, like when you think about it in terms of thoughts, like prayer, oftentimes, whether it's verbal or it's nonverbal, like it's it occurs in our thoughts, like our cognitions. And there's something really powerful of like, when we think about something, we tend to worry or ruminate on it. And that tends to actually have a lot of negative mental health effects because it's keeping us from thinking about or moving towards the life that we want. It is distracting us from like the present moment. I know there's a lot of times like my daughter especially is really good at calling me out. She'll be like, "Mom, are you anxious about something? Because you've like stopped listening to me." And you're just like, and the fact that she knows that that's part of my anxiety is that I'm typically thinking about something over again, like a loop in my head, and that can kind of pull me away from the present moment. And I, goodness gracious, love that she's like comfortable enough to call me out of that. And then it's like, you're right, baby. I'm so sorry. Like, let me take some deep breaths. Then she'll usually guide me through some breathing practices like bubble breaths or star breathing, which, my kid, that this is like who she is and her little perfect little beautiful being. But like when you think about when you're ruminating over something, sometimes our thoughts can get stuck in these loops. And so there was a situation recently where something happened, and it was a situation at work, someone I don't even really know, but the situation involved a kiddo and family, and thoughts started going and wandering and being curious and storytelling and all this stuff. And like I paused and just prayed, or meditated, thought about them in a way that was compassionate and kind, and was like trying to stop that thought pattern. And what reframe does is, like, in a psychology setting, reframe can look like in the example of parenting, a parent's like, I'm really overwhelmed with my child's behavior. They're throwing temper tantrums. They're doing it because they're mad at me. And the therapist might say to reframe the parent, like, well, maybe your child's not throwing a temper tantrum because they're mad at you. Maybe they're hungry. Does the therapist know
Mhm.
the child's hungry? Not necessarily. Like, there's not like this mind reading that happens, but what happens in that parent is like, oh, and all of a sudden it changes from compassion and curiosity away from like defensiveness or judgment or ruminating or worrying to like this place of like, oh, I'm curious what's wrong. Or is this a cry for connection? I want to hold you and take care of you and check on you. And it honestly like then becomes like this domino effect of change that can happen. And I think that same thing with prayer. Like it captures our thought processes in a way that reframes them. So we're all of a sudden moved towards this place of like compassion or concern. And that's towards others, that's towards the world, that's towards us. I think sometimes it can break us down so much in that it allows us to say, like, I don't know how I feel, or to name emotions that I just did a grief retreat over the weekend. And like we talked about hard emotions and had kiddos name hard emotions, and they named emotions like disappointment and relief and feeling terrified, feeling a loss of control and those things. I'm like, those are things that in adulthood we still are afraid
Yeah.
of. And the
Yeah.
heaviness of that. And yeah, and the shift of that, being able to reframe that is honestly so incredibly powerful. And whether that, I think that when you think of it in the terms of that, I love what you were talking about, that connection piece, that if you are praying to God or creator, the divine in you, or whatever that looks like for you, I think there's also this like extra thing that's paired of like, when I come home and I've had a bad day and I talk to my husband about it, or I talk to you about it,
Mhm.
there's something really holy and sacred to say, like, I'm not
Right.
asking you to fix this. I'm just asking you to listen.
Right.
And like,
Because as people, we
Mhm,
regulate through relationship. Like that's just how we were designed, right? Like to be able to relate to one another, to be able to affirm one another, to be able to say that's valid. There's something that chemically happens inside of us when someone says, I totally get why you would react that way, right? And so like using that and that word reframing, so like reframing prayer in this way that says this is an act of relational regulation,
mhm,
um, I think really can help some of us be able to enter back into a sacred space
mhm,
that also frees us from this really harmful, and again, prayer trauma, this really harmful practice that looks at prayer as objective based, right? Like, I am praying just until I get this answer. And like, we become so focused on what we think that answer should look like that we miss like any activity that might look like something different, right?
mhm,
Or we're praying specifically for something to happen in someone else, and we're not necessarily mindful of changes that may need to happen in us, like you were talking about with the reframing and the perspective and widening this lens a little bit. And so I think when we look at this and we change this, we deconstruct this, as that language that many of us are familiar with, um, and we look at prayer through this lens of the intersection of faith and mental health, right? We
mhm,
see that scientifically, there's a lot of data that says that engaging in that practice is
mhm,
beneficial.
mhm,
And we see that when we navigate that and we reclaim that, we reframe that, we relearn how to enter that space in a way that allows us to navigate our days and our world and our culture and our triggers and the holidays and our families and all of the things that come with it in this way that says, this is one more tool that I have to navigate the world. And in the sense of spirituality, right, it also helps me to put into perspective my place in the
mhm,
wider scope of the universe, that like what's happening to me is valid and it's big to me, but
mhm,
at the same time it's not all that's happening in the universe. And I think there's something also really regulating about that. And so I think it's powerful for us to really walk people through, whether that's pastorally as a faith leader, helping people to reframe and relearn and re-enter the practice of prayer, or as a mental health professional, helping people to heal and acknowledge prayer trauma, to understand what that might sound like in a client, to be able to see that that may be a thread we need to pull on and talk about, so that we can help people process that, so that they can kind of reclaim that as a tool that has been effective and can be effective again.
Yeah. I think prayer, I think meditation, mindfulness, like whatever language, relational regulation, like we're going to start using that now, whatever that really resonates with you and maybe something you engage in, or you're curious about, again, I think all of those things have this somewhat consistency in that they're happening in our thought processes, but they're happening also with our emotions, and which is like the utter essence of our humanity. And is honestly usually like this launching pad of like our spiritual craving for like curiosity
Yeah.
and connection and all those things. And so like emotions are such a beautiful, sacred part of who we are. And so when you look at those practices, I think that there's something really, really beautiful about the fact that, and admitting like these things do not change the world because we do them. They do not bring peace into the world because we do them, but it allows us to like create peace in and of ourselves. And when we do that, that
Yeah.
peace is contagious. That peace is what it takes care of other people. Like I think of like you create peace in your own home, or you create peace in your own environment. And I think that there's something really powerful about that, that is maybe a little glimmer of like, this is what I know that I can do. Like I can regulate my emotions. I can regulate my
Mhm.
nervous system. I can model that for the people closest to me. I think of little birds
Yeah.
building their little nest, like here's my little nest, or like here's a little bubble I
Yeah.
have, or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's something about it that then is like contagious, or people are curious about it. And I think that there is a piece of that that then it also like increases our capacity for compassion. It increases our capacity for a longing for justice, and it spills into so much else. And I think for
Yeah.
me, that awareness felt really selfish when I looked at it from the lens of like
Mhm.
more traditional Christian perspective, but through
Yeah.
deconstruction have come to that realization like there's so much power in that
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Well, and I think you just named something really important, Holly, that for many people is also a piece of healing from religious trauma, especially prayer trauma, and a deconstruction journey for a lot of people, is the emotional component of that, right? For a lot of people, and I'm not going to go too deeply into this because, again, we'll talk about this at that webinar on the 16th, but for a lot of people, especially people who've been raised in very fundamental, very rigid religious backgrounds, a lot of times you are taught that your emotions are wrong, they are bad, they are selfish, anything that is of, as they would often say, I'm using air quotes for those of you that are listening, like of the flesh, right? Like things that are coming from your humanity, that you don't bring those
Mm-hmm.
into holy spaces. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of places may have taught people that overly emotional prayers maybe aren't effective prayers. I've heard that teaching before. I've also heard teaching of like not appropriate to bring those things, right? Like anger is not a holy emotion. Again, air quotes, and me saying these are examples of things that are traumatic for people to be taught. Um, and so if I have an angry heart, I can't bring that into my prayer, right? But in reality, and in learning to reframe and in learning to recognize that, hold on a second, right? If I believe that
Mm-hmm.
I'm in relationship with people and I'm in relationship with something that's holy, I can bring the fullness of who I am and what I feel into that space and be honest about it. And
Mhm.
my anger may motivate my prayer and it may shape my prayer, but that doesn't cancel out. It
Mhm.
doesn't invalidate how I feel or what I'm concerned about. And actually, as I process those frustrations and those angers and whatever that emotion is,
Mhm.
I regulate myself in doing so, right? My heart rate comes down as I process that, like the big dark room, and I'm narrating to myself those things. I'm grounding myself, I'm checking in with myself, I'm reminding myself that there's perspective, right? I'm putting those pieces into myself so that I can catch a break, catch a breath.
Mhm.
My chemicals are readjusting as I'm relationally regulating in that space. And that's really important for us to name because there is a lot of weaponization of emotions that has happened in faith spaces that have taught people that those feelings, those emotions, that language around that is bad or sinful. And that's just not the case. And so, if that's been an experience you've probably suffered some prayer trauma. And there's some work to be done to acknowledge that and see how that's impacted you.
Yeah. I that makes me really, really resonates with this. I know last week we had this really powerful conversation with our friend Haley, and something she said that has just like really stuck with me was how in a process of like trying to figure out your own spirituality, like stop reading and like looking at other people and just like reflect inward. And I think that's really, really important. And so I think it's really important, like we're not just like throwing things at you, but that there's an invitation to be like, just check in with yourself and what resonates
Yeah.
with you. In doing so, though, I'm a huge reader. You are a huge reader and love to connect through books. I think there's something really grounding through reading. And probably one of my favorite authors of just that I connect with so much is Caitlin Curtis. She is of the Potawatomi tribe. Beautiful author, beautiful poet who just brings so much wisdom. But something that I have really felt really safe in reading a lot of her work is that she has deconstructed as someone who was raised in the Christian evangelical world. And the way she writes is very much like a friend. It just feels very validating of where you're at and gives you a lot of like, oh, validation to have the permission to explore. And so I'd really recommend anything she writes. If you're really exploring something that just gives you a little bit of like, here's kind of an open window without telling you what is and what isn't. But she wrote a new book. I would have picked this up even if I didn't know who she was as an author because it's beautiful. It's called Everything is a Story. I'm going to show you the cover if you have the video. It has a pair of hands and they're holding a little acorn. And it's this beautiful book that follows the life cycle of an oak tree. Which it's just so I just like yeah, I like cried when I read that she was writing this because I was like, I cannot wait to read this. So I've been like waiting for forever. So I've been just like reading a chapter at a time, which is not like me because I've just been like absorbing it and sitting with it. And so a couple of days ago I read this chapter and it just was really beautiful. And she talks a little bit about prayer in this chapter. So I wanted to read just a little portion of that. But she says, the reality often is that I show up to prayer with nothing to say but every guttural feeling imaginable. Why does it hurt so much to be human? Why do we destroy each other? Why do we tell stories that create such suffering? Why do we practice violence? Why do we disagree on what violence and peace even are? Maybe prayer is just about acknowledging that we often don't know what the hell we are doing, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Maybe
Yeah.
prayer is for linking our arms together and collectively admitting that we are complicated human beings living on a sacred earth that we have harmed. Maybe we start there.
Mm, that's powerful stuff. And it's probably a really good place for us to end there because I feel like that's something people just need to sit with.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
said, and like Haley said last week, I think a lot of us, especially as faith leaders, so I'm naming this in myself, like we can hear things like that and have this urgency to
Mhm.
interpret them and apply them for everyone. And I think
Yeah.
instead it's really important to just like listen to that and
Mhm.
let that be what kind of lingers in that space.
Yeah. I love it.
Hmm.
Thank you
Be back
for,
next.
I was gonna
Go
say
ahead.
thank you for diving into this conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, it was good stuff. I'm glad you brought it. Yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll see you guys back next week.